Have you ever woken up in the dead of night while camping, surrounded by nothing but the whispering trees and the crackle of a dying fire, only to realize that the footsteps circling your tent aren't from an animal at all, but something far more sinister that knows your name? That's the kind of terror we're diving into today, folks, with 3 true chilling camping horror stories that have been shared with me over the years on Unfold Diaries. These aren't made-up tales, they're real experiences from real people who reached out after going through hell in the wilderness. I've pieced them together from their emails, voice messages, and even a couple of shaky video confessions. And let me tell you, recounting them still gives me chills. The first one comes from a woman named Sarah, who was just trying to escape the city grind with her boyfriend back in 2018. They decided on a remote spot in the Pacific Northwest, one of those off-the-grid areas in the Olympic National Forest, where the moss hangs thick from the branches like nature's own curtains, and the fog rolls in so dense you can barely see your hand in front of your face. Sarah told me she picked it because it was supposed to be peaceful, far from the crowded campgrounds with RVs and screaming kids. They drove for hours on winding dirt roads, the kind that make your tires spit gravel and your suspension groan, until they found a clearing by a small stream. It was perfect at first. They set up their tent, built a fire from fallen branches that smelled like pine and earth, and cooked hot dogs over the flames while sharing a bottle of cheap wine. The air was crisp, carrying that fresh, wet scent of ferns and rain-soaked soil. And as the sun dipped below the treetops, painting the sky in oranges and purples, Sarah felt like she'd finally left her stressful job behind. But as night fell, things started to feel off. It was subtle at first, the way the woods seemed to swallow sound, making their laughter echo back at them, distorted, like it was mocking them. Her boyfriend, Mike, brushed it off as the alcohol, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. Around midnight, as they zipped into their sleeping bags, the temperature dropped sharply, turning their breath into visible puffs inside the tent. That's when they heard it, a low whistle, almost like a tune, drifting through the trees. It wasn't a bird, it was too deliberate, too human. Mike sat up, his eyes wide in the glow of their lantern, and whispered, "Did you hear that?" Sarah nodded, her heart pounding against her ribs like it was trying to escape. They listened, frozen, as the whistle grew closer, circling the tent in a slow, methodical pattern. It stopped right outside the flap, and then came a voice, soft, almost childlike, saying, "Can I come in? It's cold out here." Sarah's blood turned to ice. She grabbed Mike's arm, her nails digging in, and he shook his head furiously, mouthing, "No." They didn't move, didn't breathe, for what felt like hours, until the whistling faded away into the night. The next morning, they laughed it off nervously over coffee brewed on their portable stove, convincing themselves it was a prankster, or maybe even a hallucination from the wine. But as they packed up to hike deeper into the forest, Sarah noticed footprints, small, bare feet imprinting the mud around their site, leading off into the underbrush. They weren't animal tracks, they were human, child-sized, but with toes that seemed too long, almost claw-like. Mike tried to joke about it, saying maybe some kid from a nearby town was messing with them. But there were no towns for miles. They pressed on anyway, following a trail that wound uphill through towering cedars, the ground soft and spongy underfoot from years of fallen needles. By afternoon, the fog had thickened, reducing visibility to a few feet, and that's when the whistling started again, this time during the day. It echoed from all directions, bouncing off the trees, making it impossible to pinpoint. Sarah's pulse raced. She clung to Mike's hand, their palms slick with sweat despite the chill. "We need to go back," she hissed, but Mike, stubborn as ever, insisted they were just paranoid. As the sun began to set again, they hurried to set up camp in a new spot, a small meadow ringed by boulders. The fire they built crackled reassuringly, its smoke curling up into the misty air, but Sarah couldn't eat. She kept scanning the tree line, where shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. That night, the voice returned, closer than before. "Please, let me in, I'm so hungry." It scratched at the tent fabric, a slow, deliberate scrape that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. Mike grabbed their hiking pole, ready to swing. But when he unzipped the flap, just a crack. There was nothing, just the fog swirling like a living thing. They barricaded themselves in, hearts hammering, whispering plans to hike out at first light. But sleep didn't come easy. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps, every hoot of an owl like a laugh. Around 3 a.m., Sarah jolted awake to Mike's muffled scream. He was being dragged out of the tent, his legs kicking wildly as something pulled him into the darkness. She lunged after him, grabbing his ankles, screaming his name as the fog enveloped them. Whatever had him was strong, inhumanly so, its grip like iron claws. She fought, pulling with all her strength, until suddenly it let go, and Mike tumbled back inside, his calves lacerated with deep gashes that oozed blood onto the tent floor. They bandaged him as best they could with their first aid kit, the metallic scent of blood mixing with the earthy smell of the woods, and huddled together until dawn, listening to the whistling retreat. When morning broke, pale and gray through the mist, they stumbled out, Mike limping badly, and made for their car. But as they reached the stream near their original site, Sarah saw it, a small figure crouched by the water. Its back to them, skin pale and mottled like bark. It turned slowly, its eyes black voids, mouth stretched in a grin that showed too many teeth. "You didn't let me in," it whispered, before vanishing into the fog. They ran, didn't stop until they hit the road, and Sarah swears to this day that as they drove away, she heard that whistle following them for miles. Mike's wounds got infected, he spent weeks in the hospital, and their relationship never recovered. Sarah hasn't camped since, and she warns anyone listening, some things in the woods aren't lost, they're waiting. Now, shifting gears to our second story, this one sent in by a guy named Alex, who was part of a group of friends on a backpacking trip in the Appalachian Mountains back in 2020. Alex described it as one of those bro trips for college buddies, reconnecting after graduation, loaded with gear, beer, and high spirits. They chose a section of the trail near the Great Smoky Mountains, where the paths twist through dense rhododendron thickets, and the air hums with insects. The first day was all laughs. They hiked about 10 miles, swapping stories from their dorm days, the sun filtering through the canopy in golden shafts that warmed their skin. They stopped at overlooks where the views stretched for miles, misty blue ridges rolling into the horizon, and Alex felt invincible, the weight of his pack a welcome burden. As evening approached, they found a secluded campsite off the main trail, a flat spot under a cluster of hemlocks with a fire ring already there from previous hikers. They gathered wood, the dry snaps echoing as they broke branches, and soon had a blaze going, its warmth pushing back the cooling air. They roasted marshmallows, the sweet char filling the air, and passed around a flask of whiskey, their voices growing louder with each swig. But as the stars emerged, pinpricks in the velvet sky, Alex noticed how quiet the woods had become. No crickets, no owls, just an oppressive silence that pressed in like a blanket. One of his friends, Tom, joked about bears, but Alex felt a prickle on his neck, like they were being watched. They turned in around 11 p.m., zipping into their tents, 2 sharing each, and Alex shared with his buddy Ryan. He lay there, staring at the nylon ceiling, listening to Ryan's snores. When he heard it, a distant crack, like a branch breaking under weight, he dismissed it as wildlife, but then it came again, closer, deliberate. Peeking out, he saw nothing in the moonlight filtering through the trees, just shadows dancing from the wind. He dozed off eventually, but woke to a scream, piercing, raw, coming from the other tent. Alex bolted up, heart slamming, and unzipped the flap to find Tom outside, flashlight beam shaking as he pointed into the darkness. "Something grabbed me," Tom gasped, his ankle swollen and bruised, like fingers had wrapped around it. They searched around, beams cutting through the night, but found only disturbed leaves. Chalked it up to a dream or a muscle cramp. They tried to settle back, but the atmosphere had shifted, tension thick as the humidity. The next morning, over instant coffee that tasted bitter on their tongues, they noticed odd marks around the site, long scratches on the tree trunks, like claws raking bark, too high for a raccoon. Ryan laughed it off, saying maybe a bear, but Alex's gut twisted. They hiked on, the trail narrowing, roots tripping them as the incline steepened. By midday, clouds gathered, thunder rumbling in the distance, and rain started, a cold drizzle that soaked through their jackets, turning the path to mud that sucked at their boots. They pushed through, muscles aching, until they reached a ridge with a view of the valley below, shrouded in storm. Setting up camp early in a sheltered hollow, they built a fire with wet wood that smoked more than burned, the acrid scent stinging their eyes. As night fell, the rain pounded the tent roofs like drums, masking other sounds. Alex couldn't sleep, he kept replaying Tom's scream in his mind. Around 2 a.m., the rain eased, and that's when the whispers started, faint, indistinguishable words filtering through the fabric. He nudged Ryan, who grumbled but listened, his face paling. "What the hell?" Ryan muttered. They shone lights outside, rain dripping from leaves, but saw nothing. Then, from Tom's tent, another yell. "It's pulling me." But the storm raged again, lightning flashing, thunder cracking like gunshots. Huddled in one tent, they waited, flashlights draining batteries, the air heavy with sweat and fear. Alex felt something brush the tent wall, a slow drag that made the fabric bow inward. "Go away," he whispered, but it persisted, circling. Dawn brought relief. Gray and wet, they packed frantically, Tom hobbling on a makeshift crutch. As they descended, Alex glanced back and swore he saw a shape tall, gaunt, blending with the trees watching. They made it to a ranger station, where Tom got treated for what officials called animal attacks. But Alex knows better. The group doesn't talk anymore. The experience fractured them. Alex says if you're in those mountains, listen to the silence. It means something's listening back. Our third and final story hits even closer to home for me, shared by a couple, Emily and David, who went camping in the Rockies in Colorado during the summer of 2022. They were celebrating their anniversary, wanting something romantic yet adventurous, so they chose a spot in Rocky Mountain National Park, but off the beaten path, a high alpine lake surrounded by jagged peaks that pierced the sky like knives. Emily described the drive up as breathtaking, winding roads flanked by wildflowers in bloom, their colors vivid against the green meadows, the air thinning as they ascended, carrying the sharp tang of pine and snowmelt. They arrived at the trailhead late afternoon, shouldering packs loaded with gourmet snacks, a bottle of champagne, and their cozy two-person tent. The hike-in was about 5 miles, uphill through switchbacks where elk grazed nonchalantly, their antlers silhouetted against the setting sun. By the time they reached the lake, the water mirrored the twilight sky, rippling gently from a breeze that cooled their sweat-dampened skin. They pitched the tent on a grassy knoll, the ground soft with alpine turf, and built a small fire, careful with regulations, using a pit to contain it. As stars blanketed the heavens, brighter than any city view, they toasted with champagne, bubbles fizzing on their tongues, sharing whispers of future plans. It felt magical, intimate, until the wind picked up, howling through the passes like a mournful cry. David joked about ghosts of old miners, but Emily felt uneasy, the vastness of the landscape making her feel small, exposed. They crawled into the tent, bodies entwined for warmth as temperatures plummeted below freezing. Sleep came in fits, interrupted by the wind's gusts flapping the rainfly. Then, around midnight, Emily woke to a sound, a rhythmic thumping, like footsteps on the frozen ground, approaching. She shook David, who listened, his breath hitching. Probably a deer, he murmured, but it stopped right outside, and they heard breathing heavy, labored, as if through congested lungs. Emily's skin crawled. She clutched David's hand, nails biting into his palm. The thing outside scratched at the dirt, then pressed against the tent, the fabric indenting under weight. "Hello," David called tentatively, voice cracking. No answer, just more breathing, closer now, like it was sniffing. They stayed silent, terror gripping them, until it moved away, thumps fading. Morning light revealed prints, large, boot-like but uneven, as if the walker dragged one foot. They tried to enjoy the day, hiking around the lake where trout jumped, silver flashes in the sun. But the prints circled the site, fresh ones appearing. While they were gone, Emily's nerves frayed. She suggested leaving, but David wanted one more night. As dusk fell, they fortified the tent with rocks, fire blazing higher, flames licking the dry air. But the thumping returned earlier, multiplied now. It sounded like 2 sets, pacing. Emily peered out, seeing shadows flitting between boulders, humanoid but hunched. "David, look." she whispered, but when he did, a face pressed against the mesh window pane, eyes sunken, mouth agape in a silent scream. They recoiled, screaming, as hands cold, bony grabbed the tent poles, shaking violently. "Get out, our spot, leave." Dawn came slowly, the tent torn, gear scattered. They fled, descending in panic, boots pounding the trail. At the ranger station, they reported it as squatters or meth heads, but rangers found no one, just old graves nearby from a mining accident. Bodies never recovered. Emily and David divorced. Soon after, the trauma lingered. Nightmares of those faces. They believe it was something undead, guarding the land. But whatever it was real enough to scar them forever. These stories remind us, folks, the wilderness isn't always welcoming. Stay safe out there. And if you have your own tale, share it with Unfold Diaries, sweet dreams or not.